Okay, so we are living in strange times, but let's put that aside for the moment. I did say to you that we have spoken about the way in which Christianity has been constructed or was constructed, first through Paul, and then later, I guess, in 325 at the Nicene Council. That's already doctrine. But even, especially in Paul, as we saw yesterday, there is a construction of the Christian in relationship to the Hebraic. And unlike some modern takes, and we saw Reverend Fraser argue about the continuity, which he demonstrated to us, the history of Christianity has shown the break. And what follows from that is a history of persecution and missionizing. And in simple terms, one could understand anti-Semitism as being the refusal of the Christian to accept the Jewish other for what he is. Because the Jewish other, the other of the Old Testament, the other who doesn't agree to the terms of the New Testament, is a thorn in the side of Christians who take the lack of assent of the Jews into their story as something that cannot be tolerated. So we looked at that in relationship to Paul, and I wanted to see together how the Pharisees, which really are, of all the sects, and Giles mentioned some of those sects, they are the antecedents, the ancestors of contemporary rabbinic Judaism. So here, I thought we'd look at Mark 3 and then Mark 2 and then Mark 7. So here we'll start with Mark 15. And as he sat at table in his house, many tax collectors and sinners were sitting with Jesus and his disciples. For there were many who followed him. Jesus has many followers. He's spreading the good news. He is an evangelical. He's spreading the good news of this new, I guess, his new dispensation. And what is that good news? And why does he have so many followers? And the scribes of the Pharisees, when they saw that he was eating with sinners and tax collectors, said to his disciples, why does he eat with tax collectors and sinners? So presumably now the Pharisees are being understood as elitists, and they're never going to sit with sinners or tax collectors. I guess tax collectors are the last people you want to see. And when Jesus heard it, he said to them, those who are well have no need of one more time. Those who are well have no need of a physician, but those who are sick, I came not to call the righteous, but sinners. So this is also an implicit criticism of the Pharisees, who are not good teachers, meaning the Pharisees teach only to the so-called righteous, and Jesus makes himself available to everyone. Now, John's disciples and the Pharisees were fasting. I don't know about John here. And people came and said to him, why do John's disciples and disciples of the Pharisees fast, but your disciples do not fast? And Jesus said to them, can the wedding guests fast while the bridegroom is with them? Who is the wedding guest and who is the bridegroom? They are the wedding guests and he is the bridegroom among them. The days will come, now we're on 20, when the bridegroom is taken away from them, and then they will fast in that day. No one sees a piece of unshrunk cloth on an old garment. If he does, the patch tears away from it. The new from the old, and a worse tear is made. And no one puts new wine into old wineskins. If he does, the wine will burst the skins, and the wine is lost, and so are the skins. But new wine is for fresh skins. New wine is for fresh skins. I guess Jesus here is emphasizing the newness of Christianity and the newness of fresh skins. Let's just take one more pass through 21. No one sews a piece of unshrunk cloth, a good piece of cloth on an old garment. So you have a pair of pants and you have to patch them. You're not going to put a good piece of new cloth on that old garment. If he does, the patch tears away from it, the new from the old, and a worse tear is made, meaning you have to start again. Let's see one more encountered in Mark 2. And the Pharisees said, so he's walking through the grain fields. And as they made their way, his disciples began to pluck heads of grain. So anybody who knows the Hilchot of Shabbat, the restrictions on Shabbat, you're not allowed to harvest. And the Pharisees said to him, "Look, why are they doing what is not lawful on the Sabbath?" And he said to them, I love this. "Have you never read what David did when he was in need and was hungry, he and those who were with him? How he entered the house of God when Abiathar was high priest and ate the bread of presence, which is not lawful for any but the priest to eat, and also gave it to those who were with him." So here, Jesus is quoting a story from Tanakh. I have to confess, I don't know it. We could Google it, and I'm sure you're doing it as we speak at home and seeing exactly where this is from. I'm sure there is a rabbinic interpretation of why David ate the showbread in the tabernacle. And it's not an accident that Jesus here refers to the bread of the presence, because he himself becomes the bread of the presence. So he replaces the bread of the presence, but even more interestingly, he tells the Pharisees they don't know how to read their own texts. And really what we will see continually, let's just see here. "And he said to them, the Sabbath was made for man, not man for the Sabbath. So the Son of Man is Lord, even of the Sabbath." What we will see continually really now throughout the Christian tradition is Christians telling others that they don't know how to read. So here it's Jesus telling the Pharisees they don't know how to read their own texts. We'll see later on the second biggest revolution in reading in Western history after this, after the Gospels, is the Protestant Martin Luther, who tells everybody before him, his fellow Christians, that they don't know how to read. And the Reformation really is a reformation in reading, looking back at the past at Catholics and saying, you did it wrong. But here, and this is again something we keep on now going to touch upon when we enter into the Christian world, how do you relate to a precedent tradition and define yourself in relationship to it without destroying it entirely? And pretty much Christianity does that to Judaism. And we'll see the Reformation, Luther is no different. He does that to Catholicism. The early Christians are not tolerant of each other. The early Christians, the Protestants, look at Catholics like they are the devil. And it works the other way around as well. And they define each other in relationship to one another. The first instance we have of this here is the Pharisees, or the Christians in relationship to the Pharisees, or later Paul in his letter to the Romans in relationship to the Jews. One of the things that we have to consider now, living in a world where there are so many competing different stories, and we see the result of what happens when we try to impose our stories on other people, we have to try to learn from other traditions without destroying them in the process. We'll see Augustine, he will do the same thing to the Greek. Meaning Augustine was once a rhetoric teacher, he teaches Greek, and it's not like he says, well, I can make my peace with that older world. He, as we'll see, talks about the way in which the Greeks have destroyed the holy power of language, and only Christians truly understand what language is, and again, only Christians know how to read. Let's skip ahead. I mean, you can, if you got that part, then we made a lot of progress, but since I'm having so much fun, let's read Mark 7. I know Dr. Feldman loves reading the New Testament as well, because it is a text which is so, there's so much in it. Mark 7. "Now, when the Pharisees gathered to him with some of the scribes, No. So we got two bad things. Here, the Pharisees and the scribes who are associated with the letter of the law, who would come from Jerusalem. They saw that some of his disciples ate with hands defiled, that is, unwashed. And again, here we're talking about temple ritual or notions of temple or purity or impurity that revolves around the temple. And in order to eat, your hands have to be washed properly. They saw that some of his disciples ate with hands defiled, that is, unwashed. For the Pharisees and all the Jews do not eat unless they wash their hands, observing the tradition of the elders. Here it's like Mark is giving a little parenthesis explaining the story. And when they come from the marketplace, they do not eat unless they purify themselves. And there are many other traditions which they observe, the washing of cups and pots and vessels of bronze. It's interesting how Mark is describing the practice here. And he repeats this idea of the tradition of elders, which seems to be coming into conflict with whatever Jesus represents. And the Pharisees and the scribes asked him, "Why do your disciples not live according to the tradition of elders, but eat with hands defiled?" And he said to them, "Well, did Isaiah prophesy of you hypocrites, as is written, this people honors with their lips, but their heart is far from me? In vain do they worship me, teaching as doctrine the precepts of men. You leave the commandments of God and hold fast the tradition of men." And he said to them, "You have a fine way of rejecting the commandment of God in order to keep your tradition." So again, watch the strategy here, really. Jesus, as Mark tells the story, quotes Isaiah, the book of the Hebrew prophet, against the Jews. And this goes back to the question that Itamar asked. If, in fact, there is no legal basis to ensure good behavior, then what is it? We said, yes, it's the life of Jesus. But here there is an opposition between somehow doing the right thing and the traditions of the elders. This people, this is the quotation from Isaiah, honors me with their lips and their heart is far from me. In vain do they worship me. That is, it's a real, look at the interpretive creativity here. We go back to Isaiah. Jesus quotes Isaiah to the Pharisees and tells them, you don't understand your own tradition. You leave the commandment of God. You're so tied to tradition that you've left the commandment of God. So here are a couple of examples. You can take a look throughout for yourselves to see the way in which whatever complicated maneuver happens from Paul to the real establishment of the Roman Church and the institutionalization of anti-Semitism in relationship to the church. Again, the church and anti-Semitism, they go together because the Jews remain. Why are they still Jews? Why have they not converted? Why are they so stubborn in belief of their God? Or so stubborn in their not accepting the good news, the evangelical good news of the coming of Christ. But it's not only in Paul. Here, even in the Gospels, we see Jesus maneuvering the Old Testament against the Pharisees. And the Pharisees, it's a negative name. It's what we call a pejorative name. It's not a compliment. And here in Mark and in the other Gospels, the Pharisees are turned into people who do not know how to read. And it's only through the light of Jesus that people learn how to read. Onward, upward, we'll talk more about this kind of stuff when we read Augustine next time.